You ever stop and think about how just one number, one single number, can decide your next pay raise? Or even shift government policy and steer the entire economy? Well, today, we're going to dive into this powerful and honestly often overlooked tool that does exactly that. We're talking about the index number, and we're going to explore how this simple little concept tells a surprisingly huge story.
I mean, we all feel it, right? You go to the grocery store, you pay your bills, it just feels like everything is getting more expensive. But how do you actually prove that? And by how much exactly? It sounds like a simple question, but it's actually surprisingly tricky to answer.
And yeah, that's the real challenge, isn't it? I mean, think about it. The price of milk is in liters. Cloth is sold by the meter. Rice by the kilogram. You can't just add them all up. It doesn't work. So how in the world do you combine all that chaos, all that different stuff, into one clear signal? A single number that tells us if the cost of living is actually going up, or maybe even down.
Okay, so to solve that exact problem, economists and statisticians came up with a pretty brilliant tool. The best way to think about it is like a barometer. You know, the thing that measures atmospheric pressure to predict the weather? Well, this tool does the same thing, but for the economy. It measures the economic pressure. All right, here's the official textbook definition. The key phrase to lock onto here is relative change. See, an index number doesn't tell you the absolute price of something, like a carton of milk costs $3. No, instead, it shows you how much prices have changed compared to a starting point. We call that starting point a base period. And we set it to 100 to make things easy.
And this quote, I just love this quote because it captures the whole idea perfectly. Taking the pulse of the economy. That's exactly it. You've heard of these for sure. Think about the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. That's the one that measures inflation, or even the Dow Jones for the stock market. These are all just different kinds of index numbers, and each one is giving us a vital sign, a pulse, on a different part of the economy.
And that's really the power of it, you know? It's one number that tells this massive story. It takes literally millions of data points, the price of bread, gas, rent, cars, you name it, and boils it all down, distills it into a single figure that we can all look at, understand, and track over time. It's all about making the incredibly complex simple.
So, okay, we get what it is, but what does it actually do? I mean, why should you care? Why do governments, big businesses, and yeah, even your own boss pay such close attention to these numbers?
Well, their job description is huge. Seriously. On one hand, they're like diagnostic tools for the economy. They act as those barometers we talked about. They show us long-term trends, and they even help us forecast what might be coming down the pike. But they're not just for looking at. They're also policy tools. They guide huge decisions in government and business. And, probably most important for you and me, they hit us right in the wallet. They measure our purchasing power and are often the reason our wages get adjusted. Here's a perfect real-world example. Let's say a cost of living index goes up. Well, you can bet that unions are going to take that number straight to the negotiating table to argue for higher pay. And companies and governments, they use that same number to adjust salaries and benefits. Getting this right isn't just academic. It can literally be the difference between keeping things running smoothly and having massive strikes and lockouts.
All right, so these numbers are clearly a huge deal. But where do they actually come from? It's not magic, they don't just appear out of thin air. It's a process. And what's interesting is that it's less about super complex math and more about making a series of really smart, deliberate choices.
So let's kind of pull back the curtain and see how one of these is built. It really boils down to answering 5 key questions. First, you got to define your purpose. What exactly are we trying to measure here? Consumer prices, industrial production, something else? Then you pick the items that go into your basket of goods. After that, you need a starting point, a normal, stable base period to compare everything against. Then comes a big one. You have to decide how important each item is, which is called weighting. And finally, you pick the right formula to crunch the numbers. Okay, now that fourth step, assigning importance or weighting, that is absolutely crucial. You've basically got 2 ways to go. You could use an unweighted index, which is simple, but it means a 10% price jump for a car has the same impact on the number as a 10% jump for a loaf of bread, which is kind of weird, right? The other way is a weighted index. This one is way more realistic. It says, hey, you probably spend a lot more on your rent or mortgage than you do on, say, salt. So it gives housing a much bigger weight in the final calculation. It just makes the whole thing a more accurate snapshot of real life. You know what? To really see how this works, let's just build one ourselves. We'll use the most basic method out there. It's called the simple aggregative method. And don't worry,
The math is super straightforward. This will really show you the logic behind the curtain.
Okay, here's our data. We've got a little basket with 5 different things in it, and you can see their prices in 2 different years, our base year, 2000, and what we'll call our current year, 2015. Now, with this simple method, all we do is add up the total price of the whole basket in each year. So the only 2 numbers you need to focus on right now are right there at the bottom, 166.40 in 2000 and 221.20 in 2015.
All right, now for the big calculation. Ready? We take the total for the current year, divide it by the total from our base year, and then we multiply the whole thing by 100. And when we do that, we get this number, 132.93. So what does that number actually mean?
It's actually pretty simple. Remember how our base year is always set to 100? Well, this number tells us that the price of our little basket of goods is now at 132.93 compared to that starting 100. In other words, prices went up by 32.93%. And just like that, we took a whole table of different numbers and units and turned it into one single clear insight about what happened over 15 years.
So there you have it. We've seen what an index number is, we've seen what it does, and we even built a simple one ourselves. Now let's just zoom back out for a second and think about the big picture. What are the main things you should really take away from all this?
Okay, first and foremost, the real magic is taking a ton of complex, messy information and boiling it down into one single clear figure. Second, they really are like those barometers for reading the economy. Super powerful. Third, and this is so important, remember that these numbers aren't just pure math. They're built on a series of human choices. What to include, where to start, what's more important. Those are all decisions people make. And finally, their true value is turning all that abstract data into concrete insights that we can actually use to make big decisions, everything from our own paychecks to national policy.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. The greatest strength of an index number, its simplicity, is also its biggest potential weakness. I mean, by boiling everything down to just one number, we get that amazing clarity, but what details are we losing along the way? If the overall index says inflation is low, but your personal costs have skyrocketed, what does that mean? Whose experience isn't being captured in that single average? It's an incredibly powerful tool for sure, but it's always worth asking, what's the part of the story that this one number isn't telling us? Thanks for joining me for this one.